What would you have done? Last week we invited readers to write and tell us about things that had happened to them, or things that they had heard about. We wanted stories where people just didn't know what to do next. Here are the stories that interested us most.
I was in a small country pub. I just sat down with a pint of beer. Suddenly this huge man, he looked like a boxer, came over, picked up my beer, drank it, banged the glass down on the table, stared straight at me, and then walked away without saying anything. I suppose I should have said something, but I was scared stiff. I didn't know what to do. What would you have done? Mr. A. Watney, Hull.
I was on a touring holiday of France. It was a very hot day, and I stopped at a small deserted beach. I hadn't got my swimming costume with me, but it was early in the morning, and there were no people or houses in sight. So I took off all my clothes and swam out to sea. I'm a very strong swimmer. I lay on my back, closed my eyes, and relaxed in the water. When I looked back at the beach, a coach had arrived, and there were 30 or 40 people sitting on the sand having a picnic. What would you have done? Mr. T. Horniman, Ipswich.
I was told a lovely story about the Bishop of Fleetwood. He'd gone to New York for a church conference. Anyway, when he stepped off the plane, there were a lot of journalists and cameramen. The first question one of the journalists asked was, "Do you intend to visit any nightclubs in New York?" Well, the bishop was 85 years old. "Are there any nightclubs in New York?" he asked innocently. The next morning, the headline in one of the New York papers was, "Bishop's first question on arrival in New York, are there any nightclubs?" How would you have felt? Reverend Simon Fisher, Exeter.
My story isn't at all funny. It was a very frightening experience. You see, one night I woke up suddenly. I heard the tinkle of broken glass from downstairs, and I thought I heard the window opening and the sound of 2 voices. My wife had woken up too. She told me to do something. A couple of days before, there'd been a report about a burglary in the local paper. The burglars had been interrupted, and they'd beaten up the householder. They'd nearly killed him. I was trembling with fear. I just didn't know what to do. In the end, I didn't go down, and they stole the silver tea service I'd inherited from my mother. Was I right? What would you have done? Mr. D. Boswell, Edinburgh.
I had parked my car in a multi-storey car park, and I was taking a short cut through the side door of the restaurant in a large store. Halfway across the restaurant, I spotted my father eating pie, chips and peas. He often eats there. I crept up behind him, put my hand over his shoulder, took a chip off the plate, dipped it in the tomato sauce and ate it. Then I realized that the man was not my father. I was so embarrassed. I couldn't say a word. What would you have done? Miss H.P. Branston, Cardiff.
I just parked my car in the street near the football stadium in Liverpool. It was 10 minutes before the start of the match, and I was in a hurry. 2 little boys came up to me and said, "Give us 50p, we look after your car while you're at the match." I told them to clear off, and one of them looked at me with big, round, innocent eyes and said, "Unless you give us the money, something might happen to your car while you're away. You know, scratch or a flat tyre, something like that." I was furious. What would you have done? Mr. J. Hill, Birkenhead.
I couldn't believe a story I heard the other day. It seems that a couple had just bought a house in Manchester. They wanted to insulate the roof, so they climbed up into the loft. There, under the water tank, was £20,000 in cash. They handed over the money to the police. Would you have reported the find? What would you have done? Mrs. B. Leyland, Birmingham.